No one noticed the empty plate until they noticed there was nothing beneath it. That was how Nora Bennett learned the Alpha King could humiliate a waitress without saying a single word. The Black Lantern Inn had been holding its breath since the moment Julian Blackwood entered. Rain struck the windows in hard silver lines. Firelight moved over the low beams, the iron chandeliers, the polished antlers above the hearth, and the rows of wooden tables crowded with merchants, minor nobles, guards, and men who had grown drunk enough to speak loudly, until royalty reminded them volume was not courage. Alpha King Julian Blackwood sat at the rear table beneath the wolf-carved arch. He was impossible not to see. 36, white-skinned, tall and powerfully built, with shoulders broad beneath black leather armor and a dark wolf fur cloak still damp from the storm. His face was rugged and handsome in a way that made softness seem like something he had once buried for the sake of command. Dark hair, pale eyes, a jaw shaped by discipline. The kind of man who could turn a crowded tavern quiet simply by lifting his cup. Nora had served him 3 times that evening. Roasted venison, black bread, a cup of winter wine he barely touched. He had not been rude. That made it worse. Rude men were simple. They grabbed, mocked, demanded, laughed too close to a girl's face, and called it charm. Julian Blackwood did none of that. He did not sneer. He did not touch her wrist. He did not call her pretty, girl, or servant. He barely looked at her at all. Nora told herself that was mercy. A waitress at the Black Lantern and learned not to desire attention from powerful men. Attention could become blame before the candles burned down. She was 24, white American, soft-faced, brown-haired, with gentle features people called cute when they meant harmless. Her cream linen dress had been patched twice at the hem. Her white apron smelled faintly of bread, smoke, and spilled ale. She knew how to smile while being ignored, how to lower her eyes without going blind. Still, when Alpha King Julian stood to leave, every eye in the room followed him. Beta Colin Mercer rose beside him, smooth and composed in dark green leather, silver clasp at his throat, a pleasant smile arranged perfectly across his face. His gaze moved over the tavern too softly. That was the first thing Nora disliked about him. Men who hid knives often smiled like they carried flowers. Julian placed one hand briefly on the table. No coin rang against wood. No silver mark. No royal token. Nothing. Then he walked away. The silence lasted half a breath before someone laughed. Well, a nobleman near the hearth said loudly. Even the Alpha King knows poor service when he sees it. More laughter followed. Quick, eager, grateful for permission to be cruel. Nora stood beside the rear table with an empty tray in her hands and felt heat climb her throat. She looked at the plate Julian had left behind, at the clean knife, the untouched wine, the bare wood where a tip should have been. 0. Not even a pity coin. A serving girl behind the bar winced for her. Another looked away. Mr. Harlan, the innkeeper, pressed his mouth thin, already deciding whether to blame her for the insult. Nora lowered her head. That was what waitresses did when rooms chose them for entertainment. She waited until Julian and Colin reached the front door. Waited until the rain swallowed the black edge of the Alpha King's cloak. Waited until the laughter thinned into whispers sharp enough to cut. Then she began clearing the table. Cup first. Knife second. Breadcrumbs swept into her palm. Plate last. The plate stuck slightly to the wood. Nora frowned. She lifted it carefully. Underneath, pressed flat against the bottom of the plate with a dot of black wax, was a folded scrap of paper. Her breath stopped. Not because of the note. Because of the seal. Black wax. Royal emergency wax. The kind no one waitress was supposed to recognize unless her mother had once tested food in a palace kitchen and taught her daughter that danger often hid under ordinary things. Nora did not look toward the door. She did not react. She smiled instead. Small. Bitter. Like a humiliated girl trying not to cry. Then she slipped the note into her palm, lowered the plate onto the tray, and understood that the Alpha King had not left her nothing. He had left her the only thing he could. The note was lighter than a coin and heavier than a confession. Nora carried it across the tavern inside her closed fist, while laughter still followed her from the rear table. She moved the way humiliation expected her to move. Head low, shoulders small, mouth pressed into a wounded line. Let them see that, she thought. Let them think the Alpha King's empty table had done what their words wanted. A crying waitress was harmless. A listening one was not. She slipped behind the kitchen screen, where steam rose from copper pots, and Martha Reed was cutting black bread with enough force to punish the loaf for every rude man in the room. That was cruel, Martha whispered. Not even 1 coin. Nora placed the dirty plate into the wash basin. I know. Her voice came out exactly right. Small, bruised, believable. Only when Martha turned away did Nora open her hand. The folded scrap clung to her palm, damp from sweat. The black wax had cracked when she pulled it from beneath the plate, but enough of the seal remained to show the pressed shape of a crowned wolf. Royal emergency wax. Her mother had described it in a voice low enough that even walls felt like listeners. If you ever see black wax beneath foodware, do not gasp, do not run, and do not look at the person who left it. Nora unfolded the note beneath the shadow of the bread shelf. There were only 3 lines. Do not look at me. Smile like you hate me. The man beside me is not loyal. The kitchen sounds blurred. Nora read the words again. Then a 3rd time. The man beside me. Beta Colin Mercer. The pleasant smile. The soft eyes. The silver clasp at his throat. The way he had watched the room too gently, as if measuring who could be ignored and who might need to disappear. Nora forced her mouth to curve. Not with joy. With bitterness. Like a girl still burning from insult. Then she looked toward the tavern through the narrow gap between hanging pans. Not at Julian. Never at Julian. The note had forbidden that first. Instead, she looked at the polished carving knife on the kitchen table and used its reflection to see the main room behind her. Julian Blackwood had not fully left. He stood near the front door beneath the lantern bracket, speaking to a guard with his body angled toward the rain. His face was unreadable, hard and distant. To anyone else, he looked like a king who had already forgotten the waitress he had shamed. But his left hand rested against the doorframe. 2 fingers tapped once. Stopped. Tapped twice. Stopped again. A signal? Or impatience? Nora did not know. Colin stood beside him. And Colin was not watching Julian. He was watching the rear table. Watching the plate. Watching the path Nora had taken to the kitchen. Her smile stiffened. Good. Let him see anger. Let him see a waitress wounded by pride, not a woman holding a king's warning beneath a shelf of bread. Martha moved beside her. Why are you smiling like that? Because I hope he chokes on his next meal, Nora said. It was ugly enough to be believed. Martha blinked, then gave a small approving nod. Good. Nora folded the note again and slid it into the seam inside her apron. Her fingers brushed against the small cloth packet she kept there, the one filled with kitchen salt her mother had taught her to carry. Real salt. Clean salt. Salt that smelled of earth and sea, not metal and curse work. Her mother, Elise Bennett, had served once in the royal kitchens. Not as a cook, as a tester. She had known the difference between pepper and powdered ash, between bitter herbs and sleep drafts, between ordinary silver and silver that had been blessed badly by men who wanted wolves to die slowly at dinner tables. Then Elise had been dismissed for imagining poison where there was only seasoning. Nora had been 14, old enough to understand that powerful men did not need poison to kill a woman's name. A serving bell rang from the tavern. Mr. Harlan shouted, Nora, bread to the high table, and do not embarrass us again. Again, the word struck, but it did not stop her. Nora took a tray of fresh black bread and stepped back into the tavern. Laughter had become whispers now. Whispers were worse. They lasted longer. A noblewoman glanced at her empty hands. Still no coin. Nora smiled like the note told her to, like she hated the Alpha King. No, my lady. Colin's gaze found her from across the room. For 1 second, the world narrowed to his eyes. He smiled. Nora smiled back, wounded and bitter and false. Then, through the reflection in a wine cup near the front door, she saw Julian watching Colin watch her. And she understood the first part of the trap. The Alpha King had not needed her to read his face. He had needed her to make Colin believe she never would. The second line of the trap was not written on the note. Nora found it in the salt. That was the thing about kitchens. They told truths long before halls did. Wine could be replaced, cups polished, smiles arranged, guards positioned where important men wanted them. But salt had to be touched. Bread had to be cut. Meat had to be carried hot from fire to table before ceremony could turn hunger into politics. A waitress could reach what a soldier could not. Nora crossed the tavern with the tray of black bread held against her hip, Every step measured beneath the weight of Colin Mercer's gaze. He watched her like a man waiting to see whether humiliation had made her stupid. That was useful. Wounded pride explained nervous hands. A $0 tip explained a bitter smile. It did not explain fear, and so she buried fear carefully beneath anger. The high table had been reset. That was the first wrong thing. Alpha King Julian Blackwood had not finished his wine, yet a new cup had been placed at his setting. Dark metal, polished clean, a thin black rim circling the mouth. Too obvious, too dramatic. Every guard near him watched it, as if expecting poison to announce itself with a bow. Nora almost looked at Julian. She stopped herself. Do not look at me. The note had warned her not to give Colin the satisfaction of seeing connection. So she looked at the food instead. Roasted venison, black bread, winter apples, a small bowl of honeyed onions. And beside the king's plate, a silver salt cellar shaped like a crouching wolf. Nora's fingers tightened beneath the bread tray. The wine is a distraction. The words had not been on the note she first read. Or had they? She remembered the fold. The scrap had been creased twice. One corner had stuck against the black wax. There might have been more writing hidden inside the fold. Her heart gave one hard beat. She turned slightly, using the polished side of the bread knife on the tray to see behind her. Colin was still watching. Julian stood near the front entrance, not moving, not helping, not betraying her with even a glance. Nora set the bread down. The salt cellar was closer than it should have been, not centered for the table, angled toward Julian's right hand. A wine servant approached with the black-rimmed cup, his face pale, his fingers too stiff around the stem. Every eye moved toward him. Guards. Nobles. Colin. Even Mr. Harlan from behind the bar. The whole tavern had been taught where to look. Nora looked where no one did. At the salt. Her mother's voice rose in memory. Cursed silver does not always shine. Sometimes it hides in white things. Flour. Ash. Salt. If it smells cold, child, do not let it touch a wolf's tongue. Nora leaned forward as if arranging the bread. Her sleeve brushed the salt cellar. Cold moved through the fabric. Not winter cold. Metal cold. The kind that seemed to bite before skin admitted pain. She drew back before her face changed. Beside the wolf-shaped lid, the salt grains looked too fine. Ordinary kitchen salt clumped in damp weather. This did not. It lay smooth and pale, almost beautiful, untouched by the tavern's rain-heavy air. Powdered silver. Not enough to glitter. Enough to kill slowly beneath seasoning. Nora's mouth went dry. The wine servant reached Julian's place. Colin lifted his chin almost imperceptibly. Not at the cup. At the salt. There. The real signal. Nora understood the structure of it then. The black-rimmed cup was bait for guards. The obvious danger meant to draw every trained eye. While they tested wine, argued over poison, or watched the servants' trembling hands, someone would season the king's meat with the silver hidden in plain sight. No scream. No public blade. Just a meal, a cough, a king weakening before dawn, and a bitter waitress who had reason to hate him. Nora lifted the bread tray again, forcing herself to move slowly. Too fast would expose her. Too slow would lose him. A nobleman at the high table smirked. Careful, girl. Perhaps if you serve better, His Majesty may leave you a crumb next time. Laughter stirred. Nora smiled exactly as the note had commanded, like she hated Julian Blackwood. Yes, my lord, she said. Then she lowered her gaze to the salt cellar and saw the second hidden thing. At the base of the crouching wolf, beneath a seam no diner would notice, was a narrow, dark line. Not decoration. A concealed compartment. Something small rested inside the bottom of the salt cellar. A blade, perhaps, or a needle. Nora felt the whole tavern sharpen around her. The wine was not the danger. The salt was not even the only danger. And Alpha King Julian Blackwood was standing 3 steps away from a table where every object had been arranged to kill him, while everyone laughed at the waitress who had been left nothing. Nora tried to reach the salt before the toast began. That was her mistake. Not because she moved too quickly, because Colin Mercer had been waiting for her to prove she understood. The tavern had settled into that strange, dangerous quiet that comes before important men drink to things they do not mean. A minor lord at the high table rose with his cup already lifted. The black-rimmed goblet stood near Julian Blackwood's hand, polished and theatrical, begging every eye to suspect it. Beside the plate, the wolf-shaped salt cellar waited in plain sight. Nora stepped closer with the bread tray. One more pace, and she could touch it. One more breath, and she could move it. A hand closed around her wrist. Colin's grip was gentle enough to look polite from across the room. That made it worse. Pain did not need to be loud to be understood. "Careful," he said softly. "You have already served this table." Nora lowered her eyes. "The bread is fresh, my lord. So was the insult you received." His smile warmed for the watching guests. Yet here you are, returning to His Majesty's side as if humiliation were an invitation. A few nobles laughed. Nora felt the sound move across her skin. Julian stood 3 steps away, expression carved from stone. He did not look at her. He did not defend her. He could not. The note in her apron seemed to burn against her ribs. "Do not look at me. Smile like you hate me. The man beside me is not loyal." Nora forced her mouth to tremble into something bitter. "I am only doing my work." Colin's thumb pressed harder against the inside of her wrist. "Then do it from where servants belong." He turned her slightly, just enough that her body faced the lower tables instead of the salt cellar. To everyone watching, it looked like correction. A beta restoring order. A noble protecting the king from a waitress too eager to repair her wounded pride. But Nora saw his eyes. He was not amused. He was measuring how much she knew. The wine servant reached Julian's place and set down the black-rimmed cup. The young man's face was pale enough to look ill. His hands shook so visibly that even the guards noticed. "There," Colin said, raising his voice. Perhaps now every nervous servant in this and can remember that royal tables are not places for personal drama. The insult landed exactly where he wanted it. On Nora. The crowd turned with it. A merchant near the hearth snorted. All this over no tip. Another man added. Maybe she hoped to earn one on her knees. Laughter rose again, uglier this time. Nora held the tray until her fingers ached. The salt cellar sat untouched. The noble with the cup cleared his throat. "To Alpha King Julian Blackwood, whose strength guards our borders, and whose mercy honors even the lowliest rooms." "Mercy." Nora almost laughed. Julian reached for the goblet. Every guard watched his hand. Every noble watched his mouth. Colin watched Nora. That told her everything. The cup was theater. The salt was murder. Nora shifted the bread tray in her hand, as if flustered by the laughter. "Forgive me, my lord," she whispered. Colin leaned closer. "You would do well to remember that the king left you nothing." The words were meant to crush her. Instead, they gave her cover. Nora let her face break. Not truly. Just enough. She let shame fill her eyes. Let her breath hitch. Let her shoulders curve inward like a girl trying not to cry before a room that wanted tears. The tavern relaxed around the performance because people believed pain more easily when it entertained them. Then she stumbled. Not toward the king. Away from him. Her tray tilted. Black bread slid. A small bowl of onion sauce at the tray's edge tipped over and spilled across the floor near the high table with a wet, dark slap. Gasps. Groans. A curse from Mr. Harlan. Colin released her wrist at once, disgust flashing across his face. "Clean it," he snapped. Nora dropped to her knees before he finished speaking. There it was. The place no one guarded. The floor. Nobles looked down only to complain. Guards looked over her because danger, to them, stood upright. Colin stepped back to keep sauce from touching his polished boots. Julian remained still, one hand near the black-rimmed cup, his face unreadable. Nora pulled the cleaning cloth from her apron. Inside its fold was her own small packet of real kitchen salt. She wiped once across the floor. Twice. Then reached under the edge of the high table, as if chasing spilled sauce. Her fingers closed around the wolf-shaped salt cellar. Cold bit through her skin. She did not flinch. With her other hand, hidden beneath the hanging cloth of the table, she slid the ordinary salt from her packet into the empty spare cellar on her tray, then switched the 2 containers in one motion, so small it belonged to servants, not spies. The cursed salt vanished beneath her stained cloth. The clean salt took its place beside the king's plate. No one saw. No one but Julian. For half a breath, his fingers stopped near the goblet. Then he lifted the black-rimmed cup as if nothing had changed. Nora stayed on her knees, head bowed, sauce staining her apron, while the room laughed at how low she had fallen. And under her cleaning cloth, hidden against her palm, the wolf-shaped salt cellar felt colder than death. Nora learned that saving a king could look exactly like scrubbing a floor. That was why no one stopped her. She stayed on her knees beside the high table, one hand moving the stained cloth through the spilled onion sauce, The other hidden beneath the table's hanging edge, closed around the wolf-shaped salt cellar she had stolen from beside Julian Blackwood's plate. Cold seeped through the metal. Not ordinary cold. It crawled into her palm with little teeth, turning her fingers stiff around the carved wolf's back. Her mother had warned her about cursed silver hidden in kitchen things. She had never said it would feel alive. Above her, the toast continued. To the Alpha King, the nobleman said, voice grand and foolish, whose strength keeps the wolves of the north united. Glasses rose. Boots shifted. Someone laughed softly at Nora still kneeling in sauce. Good. Let them laugh. Laughter kept eyes high. Colin Mercer stepped closer, his polished boots stopping inches from the cloth in Nora's hand. She saw their reflection in a smear of sauce on the stone floor. Dark leather. Silver buckles. Still clean, because men like Colin walked around messes they made and called themselves untouched. Faster, he said. Nora bowed her head. Yes, my lord. Her thumb found the seam at the base of the stolen salt cellar. The narrow line she had seen earlier was real. A concealed compartment lay beneath the crouching wolf, held shut by a pin so fine she would have missed it if her mother had not spent years teaching her that the deadliest part of a table was often the part no diner touched. Nora pressed carefully. The bottom shifted. A sliver of silver slid out into the cloth. Not a knife. A needle. Thin as a sewing pin, blackened at the tip, small enough to hide beneath salt, and sharp enough to break skin when a hand lifted the cellar by its base. Julian would have reached for it during the meal. The powder would weaken him. The needle would finish what the seasoning began. Nora's stomach turned. She folded the cloth around the needle before it could touch her skin. Above her, Julian lifted the black-rimmed cup. Every guard watched the wine. Every fool in the room watched the wine. Colin watched Nora. She dragged the cloth toward herself, hiding the cursed salt cellar beneath the spilled sauce as if it were only another mess. The sauce covered the carved wolf's silver surface, dulling its shine, disguising its shape. Her fingers shook once. She pressed them flat against the floor until the tremor stopped. A wine servant moved beside Julian's plate. Not to pour, to season. The young man's hand reached for the wolf-shaped salt cellar Nora had left in place, the clean one, filled with ordinary kitchen salt from her packet. Nora did not breathe. Colin's chin lifted. The signal. The servant sprinkled salt over the venison. White grains fell harmlessly across the meat. Julian did not look down. He did not smile. He raised the cup to his mouth as if he trusted the room that had tried to kill him. Nora hated that she understood the necessity of it. A king could not reveal fear before proof arrived. A waitress could crawl beneath a table and carry proof in a dirty cloth. The nobleman cried, "To peace." Julian drank. The tavern held its breath without knowing why. 1 second. 2. 3. Nothing happened. No weakness crossed his face. No silver burn touched his lips. No tremor moved through his hand. Colin's smile thinned. Only slightly. Enough. Nora saw panic flicker behind his eyes like a candle in a draft. Then his gaze dropped. To the floor. To her cloth. To the hidden shape beneath the sauce. He knew. Nora closed her fist around the cloth and stood before he could bend. "My lord," she said, loudly enough for nearby guests to hear, "I have finished cleaning your mess." The insult was small, wrapped in service, perfectly deniable. Several men laughed, thinking she had embarrassed herself again. Julian lowered the cup. His pale eyes moved, not to Nora's face, but to the stained cloth clutched in her hand. For the first time that night, Alpha King Julian Blackwood gave the smallest nod. Not gratitude. Not yet. Permission. Nora turned toward the kitchen with the cursed salt cellar and poisoned needle hidden in the filthy cloth, carrying death away from the king, while the entire tavern believed she was only removing trash. The truth did not explode. It slipped. That was what made the whole tavern go silent. Nora had almost reached the kitchen screen when Colin Mercer stepped into her path. His smile had returned too quickly, polished over panic, but his eyes were fixed on the stained cloth in her hand. "You are carrying royal tableware away from the high table," he said. The room turned. Nora lowered her head. "It is dirty, my lord. So are excuses." His hand shot out. Not graceful this time. Not gentle. He grabbed the cloth before she could pull back, and the wolf-shaped salt cellar fell from its folds. It struck the floor with a sharp silver crack. The hidden compartment sprang open. A black-tipped needle slid across the stone, and came to rest beside Colin's boot. For one heartbeat, no one understood what they were seeing. Then Julian Blackwood said, "Do not touch it." His voice cut through the tavern so cleanly every raised glass froze in the air. The guard nearest the needle stopped with his hand half lowered. The wine servant went white. Martha dropped the bread knife behind the kitchen screen. Even Mr. Harlan forgot to breathe. Nora stood very still. The cursed salt cellar lay between her and Colin, smeared with onion sauce, its carved wolf face turned upward as if accusing the room that had laughed while death hid inside it. Colin looked down at the needle, then at Nora. "She planted that," he said. "Too fast. Too desperate." Nora heard it. So did Julian. The Alpha King set the black-rimmed cup down on the table with deliberate care. "Did she?" Colin's jaw tightened. "She was beneath the table. She touched the salt. Everyone saw it." "Yes," Julian said. "Everyone saw her kneel after you ordered her to clean the floor." A quiet moved through the room. Not silence. Quiet. The kind that arrives when laughter realizes it has been standing beside something ugly. Nora forced herself to speak. The wine was meant to distract the guards. A nobleman scoffed weakly. "A waitress knows royal assassination now." Nora looked at the salt cellar. "My mother knew kitchens." The words were small, but they held. Julian's gaze moved to her. "Explain." Nora swallowed. The cup was too obvious. The wine servant's hands were meant to draw attention. But the salt cellar was angled toward your hand, not the table. It was cold through my sleeve. The salt inside was too fine for damp weather. Cursed silver powder does not clump like kitchen salt. The wine servant made a broken sound. Colin turned on him at once. Silence. Julian's eyes sharpened. "There," he said softly. The servant began trembling so hard the tray in his hands rattled. "I did not know about the needle," he whispered. "I swear it. Lord Colin told me only to use the wolf salt after the toast. He said the king would weaken slowly and the waitress would be blamed." The tavern stopped being a tavern. It became a witness. Colin lunged toward the servant, but Julian moved first. Not with a sword, not with a shout, with one step. That was enough. 2 royal guards seized Colin before his hand reached the boy's throat. "Lies," Colin spat. "Fearful lies from kitchen rats." Julian did not look at him. He looked at Nora. For the first time that night, he allowed the room to see it. Not affection, not softness. Something more dangerous for everyone who had mocked her. "Trust." "Bring the note," he said. Nora's fingers went to the seam inside her apron. Colin's face changed. There it was. The crack in the mask. Nora withdrew the folded scrap of paper, the black wax seal broken but still visible. She held it out with a hand that did not shake as much as she expected. Julian took it and unfolded it before the tavern. He read aloud, calm and clear. "Do not look at me. Smile like you hate me. The man beside me is not loyal." The words entered the room one by one. Each one struck Colin harder than any blade. A noblewoman covered her mouth. Mr. Harlan stared at Nora as if seeing her for the first time. The guest who had laughed at the $0 tip looked suddenly fascinated by their own cups. Julian lifted the note slightly. "I left her nothing," he said, "because I needed every traitor in this room to believe she meant nothing." Nora felt the sentence pass through her like heat after winter. Colin struggled against the guards. "You trusted a waitress with your life?" Julian looked down at the broken salt cellar, the needle, the cursed powder, and the stained cloth that had carried death away from his plate. "No," he said. "I trusted her to notice what men like you always forget." His eyes returned to Nora. She did. Colin Mercer's first mistake was believing shame could still command the room after truth had entered it. He looked at Nora the way powerful men looked at servants when they needed the world to return to its proper shape. Not with fear. Not yet. With outrage. As if the greatest crime in the Black Lantern Inn was not the hidden needle, not the cursed silver powder, not the wine servant trembling beneath the weight of his confession. The crime, to Colin, was that a waitress had been believed before him. "She forged that note," he said. The words came sharp and quick. Too quick. The guests turned toward Nora as if their guilt had been offered a door. Colin saw it and stepped through. "She was humiliated before this entire room," he continued, his voice rising into the shape of wounded authority. "The Alpha King left her nothing. Not a coin. Not a word. Everyone heard the laughter. Everyone saw her anger." Nora stood beside the fallen salt cellar, the stained cloth still in her hand. and felt the tavern's eyes crawl over her. It was almost impressive how fast a room could forget what it had just witnessed when given a lower person to blame. A nobleman near the hearth murmured, "She did look angry." Martha snapped, "Because you were all cruel." But her voice was small against rank. Colin pointed at Nora. She had motive. She had access. She was under the table. She carried the salt away. She held the note. She staged the discovery and used kitchen superstition to make fools of you all. The guards hesitated. That hesitation hurt more than Nora expected. Even after the needle. Even after the note. Even after the wine servant's confession. Still, they looked at her apron before they looked at Colin's seal. They saw sauce on her knees, not strategy in her hands. They saw a waitress where a culprit could conveniently fit. Julian Blackwood did not move. That was the most dangerous thing in the room. His stillness was not uncertainty. Nora understood that now. It was restraint. A blade waiting until the right throat exposed itself. Colin mistook it for permission. "Seize her," he ordered. One guard stepped toward Nora. Julian's eyes shifted. The guard stopped as if his own bones had remembered who ruled them. "I gave no order," Julian said. Colin's face tightened. "Your Majesty, with respect, you have used that phrase too often tonight." Silence. Nora's fingers closed around the cloth. The black-tipped needle lay on the floor between them, harmless now only because it had been seen. Colin drew himself taller. "Then allow the girl to prove herself. If she is innocent, why did she not bring the salt cellar directly to your guards?" Nora answered before Julian could. "Because your guards were watching the wine." Her voice shook, but it carried. "And because the moment I lifted that salt cellar in the open, you would have called me thief, poisoner, or mad. You just did all three after the proof fell at your feet." Martha made a small sound behind the kitchen screen. Colin smiled coldly. Bold words for someone left with no tip. Nora looked at him then. Really looked. The humiliation was still there. It had not vanished because Julian had explained it. Pain did not become painless just because it had purpose. The laughter had happened. The heat in her throat had been real. The room had enjoyed watching her lowered. But now she understood something Colin did not. Being lowered had put her exactly where the weapon was. "Yes," she said. "He left me nothing." The tavern stilled. Nora lifted the stained cloth slightly. "So all of you thought I was nothing. You laughed while I knelt. You looked at his cup because important men drink from cups. You ignored the floor because only servants touch it." She turned to the table. The clean salt is still beside his plate. Captain Hayes, one of Julian's royal guards, stepped forward at the king's nod. He took the salt cellar Nora had swapped into place and opened it carefully. "Kitchen salt," he said after a moment. "Ordinary." Nora pointed to the broken wolf-shaped cellar on the floor. That one was placed before the toast. It was angled toward His Majesty's right hand. The compartment opens only if held from the base. Julian looked to the wine servant. "Who gave it to you?" The young man stared at Colin, shaking. "Lord Mercer." Colin's hand twitched toward his sleeve. Nora saw the movement. So did Julian. "Hold him," Julian said. The guards tightened their grip on Colin's arms. Captain Hayes reached into Colin's sleeve and drew out a small black wax stamp. A crowned wolf. Royal emergency wax. The same mark from Julian's hidden note. Only this stamp had been cut imperfectly, one tooth of the crown broken at the edge. Julian unfolded the note again and held it near the candlelight. The seal beneath the plate was perfect. Unbroken crown. Real. Colin's forged stamp sat exposed in the captain's hand. Nora breathed for the first time in what felt like minutes. Julian turned toward the tavern. "The waitress did not forge my warning," he said. "But my beta carried a tool made to forge my seal." No one laughed now. No one dared. Colin looked at Nora with hatred so naked it stripped the polish from his face. "You should have stayed on your knees," he said. Nora's hand tightened around the stained cloth. Julian stepped between them. "She did," the Alpha King said softly. "That is why she saw what you hid under the table." The black wax stamp changed the room more than the needle had. A needle was danger anyone could understand once it was lying on the floor. Sharp, hidden, meant to pierce skin. But the stamp was worse, because it meant planning. It meant imitation. It meant Colin Mercer had not only tried to kill a king. He had prepared to make truth look false and falsehood look royal. Nora stared at it in Captain Hayes's hand and felt an old memory open. Her mother had hated seals. Not openly. Elise Bennett had been too careful for open hatred. But when Nora was a child, She remembered the way her mother's face tightened whenever a noble's wax mark arrived on a kitchen order. Red for banquet, blue for medicines, gold for royal stores, black for emergencies no one below stairs was supposed to question. Wax does not make a lie clean, Elise had once said while grinding salt between her fingers. It only teaches frightened people where to bow. Nora had not understood then. She did now. Julian Blackwood turned toward her, the real note still in his hand. Your mother served in the palace kitchens. It was not a question. Nora's throat tightened. Yes. Colin laughed, though the sound had lost its polish. A kitchen woman's daughter now lectures the crown on poison. Nora looked at him. My mother was not just a kitchen woman. The words came out quiet. They carried anyway. The tavern seemed to lean toward her. She was Elise Bennett, Nora said. Royal kitchen tester under King Rowan Blackwood. She tested wine, bread, herbs, salt, oil, medicine, anything that touched a royal table before it touched a royal mouth. Julian's face sharpened with recognition. Bennett. Captain Hayes looked up. There was a dismissal record. Years ago. Not dismissal, Nora said. Her hand tightened around the stained cloth. Punishment. No one spoke. Nora looked at the broken salt cellar on the floor. My mother found silver powder mixed into curing salt after a winter council feast. Not enough to kill it once. Enough to weaken a wolf over days. She reported it. The next morning, she was accused of stealing spice, dismissed without pension, and forbidden from entering royal kitchens again. Colin's mouth curled. Convenient tragedy. Nora stepped closer to the table, close enough for candlelight to catch the sauce stains on her apron and the steadiness in her eyes. She taught me anyway, she said. She taught me that real salt clumps in damp weather. That cursed silver stays too fine. That poisoned metal smells cold before it smells bitter. That a servant's hand often reaches danger before a guard's sword does. The wine servant began to cry silently. Nora did not look away from Colin. And she taught me to watch the things powerful men think are beneath them. Julian unfolded the note again and turned it toward the room. That is why I chose her. The words struck Nora harder than the laughter had. Colin went still. Julian continued, calm and merciless. I could not warn my guards. Too many routes had passed through your hands. I could not accuse you without proof. I could not look at Nora too long without making her a target before she understood the danger. His gaze moved over the guests who had mocked her. So I left her no coin. The room lowered around that truth. I made every coward here believe I had dismissed her. I made you believe she was too humiliated to matter. But she was the only person in this and allowed to touch the plate, the cloth, the salt, and the floor without drawing a blade. Nora's eyes burned. Not because the humiliation vanished. It did not. But now it had a shape. A purpose. A terrible one, but not emptiness. Captain Hayes stepped forward with a folded record from Julian's guard pouch. Your Majesty, the old kitchen complaint against Elise Bennett was signed by Beta Colin Mercer. The tavern went cold. Colin's eyes flashed toward the door. Too late. 2 guards moved there at once. Julian looked at Nora. Your mother saw him first. Nora swallowed. She paid for it. Yes, Julian said. And tonight, her daughter finished what she began. The words broke something in Nora she had held together for 10 years. She thought of Elise Bennett standing over bowls of salt in a rented room after the palace had cast her out, still teaching her daughter how to smell danger because truth, once learned, deserved a second pair of hands. Nora looked down at the broken salt cellar. Then at Colin. My mother was right, she said. Colin did not answer. He could not. Because the forged stamp, the hidden needle, the poisoned salt, the wine servant's confession, and Elise Bennett's old complaint now stood together in the tavern like witnesses who had finally found their voices. Julian Blackwood did not raise his voice when he destroyed Colin Mercer. That was why everyone heard him. The Black Lantern Inn had become too quiet for a tavern. The fire still cracked in the hearth. Rain still struck the windows. Somewhere near the kitchen, a pot boiled over with a soft hiss no one moved to fix. But the guests had stopped pretending this was entertainment. The laughter that had circled Nora Bennett all evening had died at their feet, and no one seemed brave enough to pick it up again. Colin stood between 2 royal guards, his green leather coat pulled crooked from the struggle, his silver clasp no longer catching the candlelight like dignity. The forged black wax stamp lay on the table beside the broken wolf-shaped salt cellar, the hidden needle, the cursed silver powder, and the note Julian had left beneath Nora's plate. Objects, Nora thought. Small things. The kind servants carried, cleaned, poured, lifted, wiped, and noticed. The kind powerful men forgot could testify. Julian placed Elise Bennett's old complaint beside the note. 10 years ago, Elise Bennett reported silver powder in royal curing salt. Nora's hands tightened at her sides. Her mother's name filled the tavern differently now. Not as gossip, not as shame, as record. The complaint was dismissed. Julian continued. Her position was stripped. Her pension removed. Her reputation ruined. His pale eyes moved to Colin. Signed by Beta Colin Mercer. A murmur passed through the room. Colin forced a laugh. Old kitchen drama has nothing to do with tonight. No, Julian said. It has everything to do with tonight. Captain Hayes stepped forward. The wine servant has confirmed Lord Mercer ordered him to use the wolf-shaped salt cellar after the toast. The forged stamp was found in Lord Mercer's sleeve. The royal emergency seal beneath the waitress's plate is genuine. Waitress. The word did not sound small in his mouth. Not anymore. Julian turned toward the guests. You all saw what he wanted you to see. A black-rimmed cup. A trembling wine servant. A humiliated waitress with reason to resent me. Several people lowered their eyes. Good, Nora thought. Let shame have witnesses too. Julian lifted the broken salt cellar. But the real weapon was here. Beneath seasoning. Beneath a table. Beneath the notice of everyone who thought danger would arrive at eye level. Colin's face twisted. She touched it. She switched it. She could have planted everything. Nora felt the accusation try to find old roots in the room. Before it could, Julian stepped beside her. Not in front of her. Beside her. The clean salt still sits on my plate, he said. The poison cellar is in the cloth she used to carry it away. The needle was hidden in its base before she ever reached the table. And the man who knew to accuse her before proof was named is the same man who carried a forged royal seal. Colin's mouth opened. Nothing useful came out. Julian looked at Captain Hayes. Take him. The guards tightened their hold. Colin finally struggled then, not like an innocent man, but like a cornered one. You will shame the beta seat over a serving girl? The temperature in the tavern seemed to drop. Julian moved one step closer. She saved my life while you tried to hide murder beneath salt. No one breathed. Do not call her small, because your crime required her to kneel. The words struck harder than any blade. Colin was dragged toward the door, but he turned his head once toward Nora. Hatred stripped his face bare. You were nothing before tonight, he spat. Nora's throat tightened. Old instinct whispered, lower your eyes. She did not. Julian reached toward the empty plate on the high table and lifted it. The same plate. The one Nora had cleared while the whole tavern laughed. Beneath it, the wood was bare now except for the faint black wax mark where the note had been hidden. Julian took a silver coin from inside his coat. Not an ordinary coin. A royal wolf mark, stamped with the crown and old enough that every noble in the room recognized it as payment made only for service to the crown. He placed it under the plate. The sound was small. Silver against wood. It silenced the room more completely than thunder. I left no tip, Julian said, because I needed them to believe she meant nothing. He looked at Nora then, and this time he allowed every person in the tavern to see that he was looking. But Nora Bennett read what I could not say, saw what my guards were trained to miss, and carried death away from my table while this room mocked her for being on her knees. Nora's eyes burned, but she did not cry. Not yet. Julian turned to the tavern. Elise Bennett is cleared of every false charge. Her pension and honor will be restored to her family. Nora Bennett is under my protection from this moment forward. Anyone who threatens her, mocks her testimony, or touches what belongs to her answers to the crown. Mr. Harlan bowed first, awkward and pale. Martha followed, tears bright in her eyes. Then the serving girls. Then the guards. Then, slower and uglier, the nobles who had laughed. Nora stared at the coin beneath the plate. It was not a tip. It was proof. Julian offered her his hand. He did not take hers. He waited. That nearly undid her more than the speech. Nora placed her hand in his. His fingers closed carefully, as if he understood that respect could be a gentler thing than rescue and more frightening because of it. The waitress they mocked, Julian said, is the reason your Alpha King is alive. Outside, rain beat against the Black Lantern Inn. Inside, Nora Bennett stood beside the Alpha King with sauce on her apron, silver cold still lingering in her palm, her mother's name restored, and every eye in the room finally seeing the woman they had mistaken for nothing. The coin under the plate did not end the night. Nora learned that before the rain stopped. People wanted endings because endings allowed them to leave rooms where they had behaved badly. The nobles at the Black Lantern Inn wanted to return to their carriages with the story already polished. A traitor exposed, a king saved, a waitress rewarded, shame folded neatly into tomorrow's gossip. Mr. Harlan wanted the floor scrubbed, the broken salt cellar removed, the sauce washed from the stone, and the tavern restored to a place where men paid for ale instead of witnessing treason. But Julian Blackwood did not move toward the door. Neither did Nora. The broken wolf-shaped salt cellar remained on the high table beside the black-tipped needle, the forged wax stamp, and the note that had turned a $0 tip into a royal warning. Captain Hayes had wrapped each object in cloth, but Julian stopped him before the last bundle closed. "Wait." The captain froze. Julian looked at Nora. "Is there something else?" The room turned toward her again. This time, it did not laugh. Nora hated how unfamiliar that felt. She looked at the salt cellar. Sauce still clung to the carved wolf's mouth. The hidden compartment hung open like a second jaw. It should have been empty now. The needle had fallen out. The poisoned salt had been exposed. Colin had been taken in chains. And yet her mother's voice rose in her memory. A careful poisoner hides one blade for the victim and one for the witness. Nora stepped closer. Captain Hayes shifted as if to stop her from touching it, then remembered what had happened the last time men assumed guards knew more than kitchen hands. He stepped back. Nora took the cleaning cloth from Martha and wrapped it around her fingers before lifting the salt cellar. The metal was still cold, too cold for something no longer dangerous. She turned it slowly beneath the candlelight. There, beneath the wolf's left paw, was a second seam, smaller than the first, not meant for a diner's hand, meant for whoever cleaned the table afterward. Her breath tightened. Julian saw it. "What is it?" Nora pressed the paw with the edge of the cloth. A tiny glass capsule slipped from the base and landed softly in her palm. Clear liquid. No color. No scent she could detect from a safe distance. Martha whispered, "God save us." Nora looked at the capsule and felt the tavern tilt into a darker understanding. "The first trap was for you," she said to Julian. Her voice sounded calm only because horror had gone very deep. "This one was for whoever found it." Captain Hayes's face hardened. "For the waitress?" Nora nodded. If Colin's plan had worked, she would have been accused of rage after humiliation. If it had failed, if she found the salt, if she tried to prove the truth, the second poison waited for her hand. A dying waitress could not explain a note. A silent witness could be shaped into whatever story rank required. Julian took one slow breath. The fire seemed to dim around him. He planned to erase you either way. Nora's fingers closed carefully around the cloth, not the capsule. Yes. The word should have frightened her. Instead, it steadied her. Because now the room understood what her mother had understood 10 years ago. Colin Mercer did not make mistakes because servants were stupid. He made them because servants were supposed to die before anyone believed them. Julian turned to Captain Hayes. "Send riders to the palace. Seal the royal kitchens, spice stores, wine cellars, and every record signed by Colin Mercer." The captain bowed. "At once, Your Majesty." Julian looked back at Nora. "I need you to come with me." The tavern seemed to hold its breath again. Not with mockery this time. With recognition. Nora looked down at her apron. Onion sauce darkened the cloth. Her knees still ached from the floor. Silver cold lingered in her palm. She had been laughed at, accused, believed, and nearly erased in the span of one meal. A sensible woman would have said no. But Elise Bennett had taught her daughter that poison did not stop being poison because the first plate was cleared. Nora lifted her eyes. "To the royal kitchens?" she asked. Julian's expression remained grave. "To the place your mother was silenced." The word struck softly. "Precisely." Nora looked at the plate, the coin, the note, and the second capsule hidden beneath the wolf's paw. Then she nodded. The Black Lantern Inn had seen the waitress save the Alpha King. But somewhere inside the palace, the old lie that ruined Elise Bennett was still waiting in a cupboard, a ledger, or a sealed jar. And this time, Nora would not clean around it. The royal kitchens did not sleep when the palace did. Nora understood that before the door opened. Long after nobles had gone to bed and guards had changed posts beneath torchlight, kitchens still breathed. Fires banked low under iron grates. Bread dough rose beneath linen. Herbs dried from rafters. Knives rested in ordered rows beside cutting boards scrubbed clean by hands no court painter would ever remember. The palace could pretend its power lived in throne rooms, but every royal body depended first on what passed through these doors. Her mother had known that. Elise Bennett had been ruined here. Nora stepped into the royal kitchens with Julian Blackwood at her side and felt the past turn toward her. The room was larger than any kitchen at the Black Lantern Inn, built of pale stone and black iron, with 3 hearths, 2 long preparation tables, hanging copper pots, spice shelves, sealed wine racks, and a locked cold room beneath the northern stair. Servants stood frozen around half-finished work. A kitchen boy held a basket of onions against his chest. An older cook clutched a flour cloth so tightly white dust streaked her knuckles. They were not looking at Julian first. They were looking at Nora. That frightened her more. At the tavern, she had been a waitress with sauce on her apron. Here, she was Elise Bennett's daughter walking into the room that had called her mother a thief. Captain Hayes entered behind them with 4 guards. By order of the Alpha King, every spice store, salt bin, wine rack, and sealed kitchen record is to be inspected. No one leaves. A young maid began to cry. Nora looked at her. Not guilty, she thought. Afraid. There was a difference. Julian seemed to sense the same thing. No servant will be punished for telling the truth tonight. The kitchen remained silent. Truth was not something servants trusted simply because a king placed it on the table. Nora moved toward the salt shelves. Not the grand locked cabinet marked for royal stores. That was where guards looked because locks made men feel useful. Her mother would have checked there, yes, but only after checking what no one thought worth stealing. The everyday shelf. Coarse salt for meat. Fine salt for bread. Gray salt for fish. Herb salt for winter stews. Each jar had a wax mark, a date, and a kitchen hand's initials. Nora ran her fingers above the labels without touching the contents. One jar sat half an inch too far back. That was all. Half an inch. A mistake no noble would see. A mistake no guard would care about. But kitchen shelves had rhythm. Cooks reached by habit. Maids returned jars by memory. This one had been placed by someone who knew where it belonged, but not how it was used. Nora pointed. That one. Captain Hayes lifted it carefully. Fine salt, he said. Open it. He broke the wax. Nothing happened. A few servants exhaled. Nora did not. She leaned closer and smelled the air above the jar. No sea. No earth. Cold. Pour it onto black cloth, she said. A guard looked confused. Julian removed one glove and laid it flat on the table, black leather facing upward. Use mine. Captain Hayes poured. White grains spilled across the leather. Most were ordinary, but beneath them, faint as moonlight, thin silver threads appeared. Not powder this time. Filings. Small enough to vanish in salt. Sharp enough to cling to meat. Dangerous enough to weaken a wolf day after day without making one meal look guilty. The older cook made a broken sound. I did not know, she whispered. I swear before the crown, I did not know. Nora looked at her face. She believed her. Who sealed the jar? Captain Hayes checked the wax fragments. Kitchen seal. No, Nora said. The other side. He turned the broken wax over. Pressed into the underside, where no servant would see unless they broke the seal and saved the pieces, was a small mark. A wolf tooth with a split crown. Colin Mercer's private kitchen authorization. Julian's expression became very still. Nora walked to the record shelf. Her mother had once told her that poisoners loved shelves more than daggers. Shelves allowed poison to become inventory. Inventory allowed murder to become numbers. The kitchen ledger lay open near the spice cabinet. Recent entries. Clean handwriting. Too clean. Nora turned back through the pages until the ink changed, until the parchment yellowed, until the dates reached 10 years ago. There. Elise Bennett. Reported irregularity in curing salt. Removed for theft of royal spice. Nora touched the line with 2 fingers. The room blurred. Julian stepped closer, but did not touch her. She was grateful for that. Below her mother's name, another entry had been scraped almost away. The ink had been cut from the parchment with a knife, but pressure remained. Her mother had taught her this too. Paper remembers what ink tries to forget. Nora angled the page toward the firelight. The hidden words rose in shadow. Second sample stored behind East Hearthstone. Her breath stopped. Captain Hayes followed her gaze. What does that mean? Nora looked toward the oldest hearth in the room, the east hearth. Its stones were blackened by years of flame, but one near the base sat cleaner than the rest. Not new. Moved. Elise hid proof, Nora whispered. Julian turned to the guards. Open it. The stone came loose with a low scrape. Behind it, wrapped in oilcloth and untouched by 10 years of smoke, lay a small glass vial, a folded paper, and her mother's silver testing spoon. Nora picked up the spoon first. Her hand shook. This time, she let it. On the folded paper, in Elise Bennett's careful handwriting, were 5 words. If I vanish, ask Colin. The dead woman's handwriting made the royal kitchen afraid. Not because it was loud, because it had waited 10 years behind a hearthstone and still knew where to point. If I vanish, ask Colin. 5 words. No accusation dressed in court language. No plea for mercy. No explanation softened for men who preferred their crimes complicated enough to survive. Just a name, written by a woman who had understood she might not live long enough to speak it aloud. Nora held the paper between both hands. The silver testing spoon lay in her palm, cold from the hidden space behind the stone, its small bowl darkened with age but still polished along the rim where her mother's thumb must have rubbed it clean. The glass vial rested on the preparation table beside the oilcloth wrapping. Inside it, white grains clung to the bottom. Salt. And something else. Julian Blackwood stood beside her, so still the entire kitchen seemed to arrange itself around his silence. Captain Hayes had stopped breathing loudly. The older cook, the kitchen maids, the boys by the onion baskets, even the guards near the door looked at Nora as if the room had become a grave and she was the only one allowed to read the stone. Nora unfolded the second paper. Her mother's handwriting filled the page in neat, careful lines. Curing salt from winter council feast. Metallic cold. Silver reaction confirmed. Reported to Beta Colin Mercer at third bell. Sample preserved. If official record is altered, compare with jar marked E17. Nora's throat closed. E17. Not a random jar. A ledger entry. A memory disguised as inventory. Captain Hayes moved to the record shelf and began turning pages with careful speed. The kitchen watched the sound of parchment as if it were a blade being drawn. There, he said. Julian looked over. Hayes read aloud. E17. Curing salt. Winter Council stores. Destroyed after contamination report. Authorized by Beta Colin Mercer. The older cook covered her mouth. Nora looked at the vial. Destroyed, she whispered. But it had not been. Her mother had known the official record would lie, so she had kept a second truth where only kitchen hands might ever find it. Behind the east hearth, near the heat, beneath the place everyone cleaned and no noble touched. Julian turned to Captain Hayes. Bring Colin Mercer here. The captain hesitated only long enough to bow. Yes, Your Majesty. No one spoke while they waited. The kitchen fire snapped softly. Rain tapped against the high, narrow windows. A servant girl wiped her cheeks with the back of her wrist and pretended she had not been crying. Nora held the testing spoon and remembered Elise Bennett teaching her over a rented room table, using cheap salt, vinegar, old copper, and patience. A good tester trusts small proof. Men lie loudly. Metal answers quietly. The door opened. Colin Mercer was dragged into the royal kitchen in chains. He looked smaller here than he had at the Black Lantern Inn. Not because the room was grand. It was not. It was stone, fire, flour, knives, hooks, jars, and work. But this was the place he had once used to bury a woman, and now every shelf seemed to know his name. His eyes went first to the vial, then to the paper, then to Nora. You brought me to a kitchen, he said with a thin smile. How theatrical. Julian did not answer. Nora did. My mother left your name behind the hearth. For the first time, Colin's smile missed a beat. Only one. Enough. Captain Hayes placed Elise's paper in front of him. This records a silver reaction in curing salt 10 years ago, reported to you before Elise Bennett was accused. Colin glanced at it. A dead woman's scribble. Nora felt the word strike. Julian moved half a step. She lifted one hand before he could speak. Not to stop him, to stand for herself. My mother was alive when she wrote it. The kitchen went still. Nora opened the vial and poured a pinch of the old salt onto the black leather glove Julian had left on the table. Then she took a pinch from the current contaminated jar and placed it beside the first. 2 pale piles, 10 years apart. The same cold smell rose from both. She dipped the silver testing spoon into a small bowl of vinegar and touched the first sample. The grains darkened at once, thin gray lines spreading like veins. She touched the second. The same reaction. A kitchen maid gasped. Captain Hayes leaned closer. Identical. Not identical by chance, Nora said. The silver was prepared the same way. Fine enough to disappear in salt. Strong enough to weaken a wolf over days. My mother found this 10 years ago. She looked at Colin. And you ruined her before she could prove it. Colin's jaw tightened. You are a waitress playing with old kitchen tricks. No, Julian said. His voice did not rise. The words still shook the room. She is the daughter of the woman who saw your first crime. And tonight, she saw your second. The older cook suddenly stepped forward. Her hands trembled, flour still caught in the lines of her skin. Elise gave me something before she was taken from the kitchens, she whispered. Colin turned on her. Be careful. Julian's eyes cut to him. The cook swallowed and continued. She told me if her daughter ever came asking, I was to say the salt was never the theft. It was the reason for the theft charge. Nora's vision blurred. You knew her? The cook nodded, tears gathering. She saved the king's table more than once. And we let them call her thief because we were afraid. The confession was quiet. It broke the kitchen anyway. Julian looked around the room, at every servant who had spent years learning the cost of speaking too soon. No more. Colin laughed once, sharp and desperate. You will condemn a beta on salt, kitchen gossip, and a waitress's grief. Julian picked up Elise Bennett's testing spoon. No, he said. I will condemn you on forged seals, a hidden needle, cursed silver, a living witness, a royal note, a wine servant's confession, altered ledgers, and the testimony of a woman you failed to erase twice. Colin went pale. Nora closed her fingers around her mother's paper. For 10 years, Elise Bennett's truth had been hidden behind stone. Now it stood in the royal kitchen with firelight on its face. And every servant in the room was watching the Alpha King believe it. By dawn, the royal kitchen had become a courtroom. No throne stood there. No banners softened the stone. No carved wolves watched from polished walls. There were only hearths, tables, knives, salt jars, flour bins, servants with sleepless eyes, and Colin Mercer in chains beside the place where Elise Bennett had hidden the truth he thought he buried. Julian Blackwood chose that room on purpose. Nora understood it when the nobles were brought in. They entered stiffly, uncomfortable beneath the smell of smoke, yeast, vinegar, and old fear. Their velvet hems brushed flour dust. Their polished boots stepped around coal stains. Their faces tightened at the sight of servants standing not against the walls, but beside the tables, close enough to hear every word. For once, power had to stand where service worked. Nora stood near the east hearth with her mother's silver testing spoon in one hand and Elise Bennett's folded note in the other. If I vanish, ask Colin. The words no longer felt like a secret. They felt like a witness. Captain Hayes laid the evidence across the long preparation table. The broken wolf-shaped salt cellar, the black-tipped needle, the cursed silver powder, the forged wax stamp, Julian's true note, the old kitchen ledger, the current contaminated salt jar, and Elise's hidden vial from 10 years before. Small things. Kitchen things. Things a careless court had once allowed a woman to lose her name over. Julian stepped forward. Elise Bennett was not a thief, he said. The words struck Nora so deeply she almost forgot to breathe. She was a royal kitchen tester who found silver in curing salt, reported it through the proper channel, and was punished because the man she reported to was the man poisoning the crown. Colin's chains rattled. This is madness. Julian did not look at him. No, this is record. Captain Hayes opened the ledger. The older cook stepped forward and gave her testimony, voice shaking but clear. The wine servant repeated Colin's order from the tavern. The forged stamp was held beside the true seal. The 2 salt samples darkened the same way beneath Elise's testing spoon. One by one, the lie lost places to hide. Nora watched the nobles' faces change. Not all at once. Shame rarely surrendered quickly, but it came. A lowered gaze, a swallowed word, a hand closing uselessly around a sleeve. They had not ruined Elise Bennett with their own hands, perhaps, but they had accepted the story because it was easier to believe a kitchen woman stole spice than a beta had poisoned power from beside the throne. Julian turned to Colin at last. Colin Mercer, you are stripped of beta rank, lands, seal, command, and protection. You will stand trial before the full council for attempted murder of your Alpha King, treason against the crown, forgery of royal seals, corruption of palace stores, and the false destruction of Elise Bennett's name. Colin's face went pale, not with guilt, with the terror of a man hearing doors close. The guards took him. As he passed Nora, he leaned close enough for hatred to reach her before his body could. You are still only a waitress. Nora looked at him. For years, those words might have found a wound. Now they found a spine. Yes, she said. The waitress who found what you hid under the plate. The kitchen went silent. Then Julian stepped beside her. Not in front of her. Beside her. He placed the royal wolfmark coin on the preparation table, next to Elise's testing spoon. This coin was not a tip, he said. It was payment owed to the woman who saved my life. But honor owed to Elise Bennett cannot be paid in silver. He turned to the servants. Elise Bennett's name will be restored to the royal kitchen records. Her pension will be returned to her daughter. Her methods will be taught to every tester in this palace. No kitchen order, no salt jar, no wine seal, and no royal plate will be considered beneath notice again. Nora's eyes burned. Martha, who had followed from the Black Lantern Inn, began crying openly near the door. The older cook lowered her head, not in shame this time, but respect. One by one, the kitchen servants bowed to Nora. The nobles followed slower. But they followed. Julian held out Elise's silver spoon to Nora. He did not place it in her hand until she reached for it. That mattered more than the court would ever understand. Nora Bennett, he said, daughter of Elise Bennett, witness of the hidden table, and the woman who carried death away from my plate. I ask you to serve the crown no longer as an invisible hand, but as Royal Table Warden, with authority over every dish, cup, seal, and servant warning in my house. Nora looked at the spoon, at the coin, at the hearthstone where her mother had hidden proof, then at the Alpha King who had left her nothing so she could find everything. I accept, she said, but the first rule will be written in my mother's name. Julian's eyes held hers. Name it. Nora lifted her chin. When a servant says something is wrong, the crown listens before anyone bleeds. For the first time that night, Julian smiled. Small. Real. Done. The words sounded like law. Outside, the rain began to soften over the palace roofs. Inside, the royal kitchen breathed again. Bread still needed baking. Fire still needed tending. Salt still needed testing. But Elise Bennett was no longer a thief. Colin Mercer was no longer untouchable. And Nora Bennett, the waitress mocked over a $0 tip, stood beside the Alpha King with her mother's spoon in her hand, no longer invisible, no longer silent, and no longer worth nothing.